chance as always to have the final say. Let's get into it and start with what will be happening, with what has been happening this past week over the barbs between ODM leader Raila Odinga saying that Kenyans must hold a referendum on the BBI report that seeks to expand the executive structure and create the position of Prime Minister before the 2022 general election. Odinga also says a referendum should not cost more than 2 billion shillings and that BBI rallies will soon resume once the COVID-19 pandemic curve flattens. And as KTN senior political reporter Patrick Amimo now tells us, Odinga has dismissed claims by Deputy President William Ruto that there exists a deep state that is determined to block him from ascending to the presidency.
Raila Odinga disclosed that he will soon be joining President Uhuru Kenyatta at State House, Nairobi, to receive the BBI report. After the official handing over, the BBI rallies will resume.
The reggae did not stop. The reggae went on half-time. The players have been getting some kind of massage and instructions from the coaches. So shortly the reggae is going to be back, and nobody can stop reggae.
Launching the BBI.
Some of the proposals in the BBI report could require a referendum. Raila dismissed claims that holding a referendum would cost a minimum of 40 billion shillings.
Oh, referendum costs billions. A referendum does not have to cost billions. A referendum does not need to cost more than 2 billion Kenya shillings. So you should not be told, oh, we have no money. There's no money to do it. No, there's money to do it.
Raila wants the referendum held before the 2022 polls.
Why are you being told, do it together with the general elections? How are you going to do it in the general elections? Already you have got 6 ballots. You want to add another 7 to the illiterate voter. That will not work. We will do it before the next general elections.
Raila, who was speaking at ODM headquarters during a party event, also dismissed claims by Deputy President William Ruto about a deep state that is eager to block him from succeeding President Uhuru Kenyatta.
Tunatishiwa ati iko system, ati iko deep state, ati iko watu watatuibia kura, hata mkipiga kura namna gani, kuna watu wameketi mahali fulani wataamua. Mimi nataka niwaambie, hawa watu tunawangojea.
So if you are talking about the deep state, who is there? Is the president and his deputy. So I go and ask Mr. Deputy President, which deep state are you talking about? We are not ourselves, we are not in government as ODM.
Early this month, Dr. Oburu Oginga, Raila's elder brother, said Raila was assured of winning the presidential election in 2022 because of the backing of the deep state.
Every time we win the election, we are robbed of that victory. This is because there is something which we were missing. And that's something which we were missing is called system. Some people are saying system is not important, but system is very important. And now we are with Uhuru Kenyatta, who is holding the system. So if the system plus our votes, which are always more than the others, what else?
So if you are talking about the deep state, who is there? Is the president and his deputy. So I go and ask Mr. Deputy President, which deep state are you talking about? We are not ourselves, we are not in government as ODM. So we don't know about this deep state. Forget about Uhuru Odinga is an individual.
Raila also witnessed the swearing-in of new members of ODM's disciplinary committee and the National Elections Board. Patrick Amimo, KTN News.
All right, we have been warming up to this discussion. Let's get into it. Let me introduce my guest this morning. I have with me lawyer and political strategist Kipchumba Karori. I have with me lawyer Dr. Alutalala Mukhwana joining us on the show for the first time. And we also have political risk analyst Dismas Mokua. My colleague from the Standard, senior reporter Roslyn Obalo, will be joining us a little later here on the broadcast. Gentlemen, many thanks for joining me this morning. Let's get into it. Let me begin with you, Kipchumba. What is your take on the barbs being traded between Deputy President William Ruto and the ODM leader Raila Odinga over who, between the two of them, is part of the so-called deep state?
Thank you, Ben. I think it is my take that deep state really doesn't exist as an concrete idea. It is just an imagination. It is just something that people have created over time to fearmonger and to sell fear to others. And I think once in a while it is a misused concept in the political vocabulary of this country. And when you say who between the two, or where do they lie when they say deep state or what, I think deep state in itself is not a connotation of who is in government or who is not. It is just a boogeyman thing that is sold so that when people do something, it is an escapist idea, if we may say.
All right. Daktari Alitalala Muhwana, what are your thoughts on this debate about the system and the deep state?
Thank you very much, Ben, for having me for the first time. As always, it's my pleasure to interact with you on these important issues affecting our nation. You've asked me my thoughts about the deep state. I wish you had asked me to talk more about the topic, but I guess we are coming to that. The deep state, as a way of definition in political science parlance, refers to a group of informal persons who are normally around this head of state and have access and unfettered control of the power around the head of state. Put in another way, a deep state refers to those in government, yet they are not in government. In other words, the president has men and women around him who are not publicly demonstrated as being close to the president, yet they are the men and women who pull the strings around the president. Now, many times, and if we contextualize this word deep state in this country, it simply means a president who is in government and the people around him. So that when we talk about the deep state being feared to ensure that, for instance, Arab Ruto does not get to power, we are simply saying that the government and its people around the head of state will interfere with the electoral process and ensure, for instance, that servers will not operate as they did last time, so that the result of an election in this country is predetermined.
All right.
That, in my view,
yes,
is the contextualization of the term the deep state. Thank you.
Thank you, Daktari. Thank you, Daktari. Very in-depth definition there. Let me bring in Dismas Mokua. Just how important are these so-called individuals, faceless individuals who make up the deep state, and how realistic is it that they have such a big say on what happens in this country politically?
Well, Dr. Mukwana has given a very elaborate definition, but just to add to it, these are people who are extremely influential. They could be elected or unelected. They would be public servants or private people, but these are people who have capacity to influence the thinking of the President of the Republic of Kenya, or rather any head of state.
Yes.
And for them, they claim that they're always acting in public interest. So at some stage, if the current administration is coming up with policies that in their view are not consistent with the public interest or national interest, then they will intervene and convince the president otherwise. And for the Kenyan scenario, we must all accept that there's a deep state in Kenya, but whether or not they're successful every single time they want to make an intervention is a conversation maybe for another day. But of course, there does exist a deep state, and most of the time members of the deep state would probably be from the military, from the intelligence, private sector, or people with access to a lot of resources. Now, they consider themselves to have the highest insurable interest in the stability of the nation and in the continuity of the nation. These are the people that if they need to speak with the president, they don't need to go through the state house controller or the chief of staff. They've got unlimited access to the president, and their views inform the thinking of the nation.
Now that you've said that, Dismas, let me ask you this. What is What do you make of the Deputy President's utterances, like warning the so-called deep state that he is not afraid of them, ahead of the 2022 election?
Well, the Deputy President, Dr. William Samoei Ruto, is a very clever politician, is a very sharp politician, is a very shrewd man. So when he talks about the deep state and when he talks about the system, he actually understands it very well, because he's been a beneficiary of the system and the deep state from his early 20s when he ran for parliament, when he worked for Youth for KANU. Those were the subsets of the deep state. So he knows how the deep state works very well, like the back of his hand. So the moment you see him coming to the public podium and saying that he has information, that some members of the deep state or some members of the system are unhappy with his 2022 candidature and the probability of him becoming the president of the Republic of Kenya, that is something that you cannot ignore. However, he misses one point, that the deep state is not always successful. It does not always achieve its objective. So if I was seated in this position, I would not be a worried man, but instead I'll also create my own deep state. I'll also create my own system and my own infrastructure to make sure that the deep state or the system as we know it does not frustrate my interests and ambitions.
All right, let's now bring in another new member of the show this morning. That is Professor Kitili, a governance expert and former commissioner of the National Cohesion and Integration Commission. Thank you, Prof, for joining us. A few weeks ago, we did hear the Raila Odinga's brother and member, lawmaker at the East African Legislative Assembly, Oburu Oginga, saying that this time Raila has the system on his side. So there is a very high probability that they will win the presidency in 2022. Is there anything to this talk from where you sit?
For me, that was an extremely unfortunate statement from somebody who I think should know better. Because what Oburu Odinga is saying is Raila has surrendered to the criminal enterprise that we call deep state. Because I heard my colleagues there try to tell us there is a deep state. The truth is, there is no deep state in Kenya. The term deep state is used in more developed countries, in the Western countries. It is used to define career civil servants who love their country so much that they are willing to defy any authority. They are willing to pay any price to protect the country, to protect the state. What does that mean? These countries have a philosophy underlying their political operations. The philosophy, for example, Kenya would have a grounded philosophy within its civil service, which says that it is going to be the best democracy in Africa or in the world. And these civil servants are willing to protect that democracy. So what we have come to call deep state here is mercenaries, criminals who have captured the state, who now use the electoral process to place people in authority who they can control. And therefore, for the Oburu Odinga to say that now he has the system and his guarantees of winning is an insult to his brother's struggle to liberate the country from state capture by the mercenaries, which we are now calling deep state. Let me also add this. As a country, we are just interested in misusing the English language. We baptized theft of public money and called it corruption to make it look better. Now we are calling, we are now trying to sanitize criminals who interfere with elections and calling them deep state as if these people do this for love of Kenya. These are criminals. And why the Deputy President said bring it on, because I'm very sure the Deputy President believes he can defeat these people. Because these are just criminals, they are mercenaries, and they cannot succeed. They should never be allowed to succeed.
Thank you, Prof. Thank you, Prof. Let's bring in my colleague, senior reporter at The Standard, Rosalind Obala, joining us on the show. Good morning, Rosalind. And we did hear what Oburu Oginga had to say. Raila Odinga dismissed, those utterances and said that indeed it is President Uhuru Kenyatta and Deputy President William Ruto that are in the system or part of the deep state. What have you been hearing covering news on the corridors of power?
Ben, thank you very much as I joined this show. I think if you've heard what Mheshimiwa Oburu had said, it elicited so much backlash within government and outside because we've always been hearing people talk about the system and the deep states, and people believe that those who are in the system and the deep state are actually the government. And that is why you heard Raila talking about the deep state being the president and his deputy president. But the other day when you heard the deputy president himself talking about the deep state trying to block him from the 2022 elections, then it raises concerns to ask who are these people exactly? Because we have been talking about the deep state. We know there are people who surround power. There are people who are very influential. Some are in government, some are not in government, but they are faceless. And even as journalists who have been covering these issues for a while now, it's a counterattack from both sides, because even if you hear from Raila's side, they are talking about Uhuru's side and Ruto's side being the people in government. If you look at the Tanga leaders, they're also saying that yes, they are in government, but they've been dislodged by a few individuals who believe that they're actually in power. But if you listen to Interior Principal Secretary Kibitu Karanja recently, he talked about that let those who are talking about the deep state actually name them, because even him is in government and he doesn't know them. So I think it is just passing the buck and politicians, because every time when elections are approaching, we will hear these things of deep state, the system, and all that. But now that Oburu himself said Raila has been winning and has not been able to be in power because he did have the system, we will wait and see to actually know who are these people who are hiding their faces, but they are the system.
All right. Kipchumba, who between Ruto and Odinga is more part of the so-called deep states?
Ben, I think Odinga Oburu answered the question aptly. I do not need to add anything. But Ben, looking at it this way, we must not succumb or allow the Kenyan voters to think that their vote does not count. When we read this discussion about the system and about establishment, is a discussion that wants to host the Constitution, and specifically Article 1 of our Constitution. Our Constitution gives the final and the ultimate power to the people. Therefore, any other idea or machination that wants to oust that power from the people should not be allowed. And then this discussion that there is a system and there is what have you, is a discussion whereby a few people, where my friend, the former commissioner, has called them criminal elements, have tried to take holdage of the system and to make sure that they manipulate the system, not to allow the government policies to run, but to allow individuals around government to run their policies over the government policies. I think between the two, Ruto has the power bestowed to him by the people as a deputy president, right, whereas Raila Odinga has gotten the power he wills currently through the handshake. And that it brings into question, do we really need elections if Raila can be powerful without an election? So, and in there lies the question. The system, establishment, and all these are comfortable having Raila in that position. And that is why William Ruto is in the call. So Raila Odinga enjoys patronage of the so-called system. But I will not like to call them system, because the patronage Raila Odinga enjoys is from a few individuals in government who want to control the 2022 election. There might not be the system, but there are people who have control over security apparatus of the system and who can get into the small secrets of government and run the way they want.
Okay. Dr. Mkhwana, in just 1 minute only, very quickly, does talk of this so-called deep state and the system make a mockery out of the Kenyan electoral system in a democracy like this?
Thank you, Ben. Allow me just to recap a little bit from what Professor said. And Professor, good morning. Nice to meet you on show. Always grateful that we do. Now, Professor dismisses the current so-called deep state as a bunch of criminals and mercenaries. To that extent, I agree, because that's what they are. However, I think the good professor is a Puritan. He believes in everything pure. But the truth of the matter is that whereas the term deep state originated as a bunch of career civil servants who had undying loyalty towards their government, the thing is that Kenyans have a way of domesticating things foreign and making their own. So what you have as a deep state, yes, it may not be a career civil servants. And for your information, some of the deep state guys in this country are career civil servants. If you want to know that they're career civil servants, then go no further than the Ministry of Interior, for example, where some of the officers there have been accused for wanting, for example, Governor Sonko's life and so forth. So I agree with Professor, but subject to that exception. Number two, I fully associate myself with the statements by Dismas Mukua. He is right that Honorable William Ruto knows what the deep state is, because if he did not know what it is, he would not speak the way he has spoken. And then, do not forget that the issue of the server has never been resolved. William Ruto is part of the government that came in when those allegations were being made. He knows better than all of us. Finally, Ben.
Yes.
Allow me to make a very, very brief comment about this whole issue of deep state in juxtaposition with our historical journey as a people of this country. Whenever a president is exiting in this country, right from 1967, there have been movements that have tectonic value to the point that people are being pushed out, others are being aligned for singular purpose of ensuring that the interests of the ruling elite are able to be rolled over to the next regime, either directly or indirectly. We saw it in 1967, for example, with the Limuru Conference, when Jaramogi Oginga Odinga was shunted aside and in came Arap Moi. We saw it in 1976, 77, 78, when Mzee Kenyatta was nearing his sunset. And those who were there decided that Moi shall not be the one taking over. And so the Change the Constitution movement came, and even the mischievous Ngorokos came. Professor is almost of that time, you must have seen this. Then lastly, in 1997, 1998 to 2002, when Mzee Moi was exiting, again we saw the vice president then being shunted aside, Uhuru being declared to be the favorite successor, and what followed was tectonic. So what you are seeing with these deep state allegations and the BBI is a preparation that the Kenyatta regime and those around him may have a transition to post-2022, and what Raila Odinga has done by coming together with the Honorable Uhuru Kenyatta is basically to have a share in the spoils and hopefully anchor himself to the next dispensation. Whether that will work or not is a question for another day. Those are my humble views on that subject.
Thank you, Dr. Ari, for that very elaborate explanation of that. Let's take a quick commercial break here on Inside Politics on KTN News. Don't go anywhere. When we come back, we shall be switching our attention to the county revenue sharing deadlock at the Senate. There is a special sitting at the Senate tomorrow to try and have a solution out of that. The 9th time that the senators will be meeting. Lobbying has been in top gear this weekend. When we come back, we shall be talking about that. Don't go too far.
It looks like Uhuru Kenyatta has been put ahead of the rest of the pack, and which is by people who themselves are interested in some of these things. And this head start really makes it very difficult for the other people to believe that it is democracy which is at play. To me, it looks very cynical and definitely an insult to democracy for one person, whatever his position is in the party, to prefer one candidate